Good evening. How's the volume? Everybody hear me okay? Yep. Okay, just making sure it's not too loud or too quiet. I'm Angela Metler. I'm an administrative assistant in the president's office. Welcome to Steam Cafe. We do this every third Tuesday. It's a partnership between South Dakota Mines, South Dakota Public Broadcasting, and Hay Camp Brewing. So we thank them for what they do for us. We could not do this without them, and we certainly couldn't do it without you. Thank you for showing up, especially on a night like tonight where the weather is less than ideal. And thank you to those of you who are attending on Zoom. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Anybody who's attending virtually, if you have any questions, you can type them into either the chat or Q&A, and I will ask them and they will get answered live at the very end. Yeah, I think that's it. So without further ado, Dr. Rod Rice.
Thank you very much, Angela. Can you all hear me okay? Thumbs up on that? Okay, that's great. I wanted to say special thanks to South Dakota School of Mines for hosting this, and the Hay Camp Brewery, and also South Dakota Public Broadcasting. And of course, the audience that's here. Thank to all of you, and then those who are tuned in on Zoom, thank you as well. I'm very happy to be here. I had to do a full disclosure before I get started. I spent 22 years in the Air Force, but I was not a pilot. I've got glasses, eyesight's not too good, and most of all, I don't look like Tom Cruise. So as a result, I ended up being a support guy. And I spent the bulk of my career as an education and training officer. And 9 years during that career, I taught at the Air Force Academy. I directed the freshman composition program. I directed the executive writing program and a number of other duties too numerous to mention. I also spent 5 years at the Air Force Institute of Technology. I was a department head there. And I gotta say this, in all the presentations, I've had probably close to 80 presentations and published papers and essays, chapters and books. But of those presentations, there's only been one other time where I talked in front of an audience where they served alcohol. And it was the best audience I ever had. So this is another occasion. They served wine at that one, so the beer might have a different effect on the audience, but nonetheless, I'm here and I'm very happy to talk about John Steinbeck. Most of you are pretty familiar with John Steinbeck, I would imagine, because he used to be, you know, for us baby boomers out there, he used to be standard fare in junior high school. They call it middle school now, but it was junior high school back in those days. And I think I read The Pearl when I was in 8th grade and was very, very much taken by it. But some of you may have read of Mice and Men, or you may have heard of The Grapes of Wrath and some of his other famous books like In Dubious Battle, or Oprah put East of Eden on her books, favorite books list. But this is a part of Steinbeck's career that people don't know much about. And during the war years, during World War II, he was very active. And he wrote a number of different things. He wrote a novel, and he wrote the book I'm going to talk about tonight called Bombs Away. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a bit. But I wanted to refer you to the slide back here. This is a picture of Steinbeck amid the bombed out ruins in London. And I think it's circa 1942 or 1943, thereabouts, one of the 2 years. I don't know the exact date. But that man standing next to him in uniform is Max Wagner, who was, for you guys, probably not a household word, excuse me. But he was a good friend of Steinbeck's. He grew up with him. And Max was also a Hollywood actor, but all he did was do bit parts. And one of his most infamous bit parts was as a homeless man in the penultimate episode of the first season of Star Trek. He didn't get credit for it, but it was called The City on the Edge of Tomorrow. So anyway, I thought you might want to know that piece of trivia in case you want to, you know, impress any people at a cocktail party sometime about who this guy was. The other thing about this, on a more serious note, is that you'll see Steinbeck is wearing a nice suit. He was working as a war correspondent. Wagner's dressed in uniform. They were both the same age. They were in their early 40s. But Wagner got in the military. Steinbeck did not. He tried very hard, but he was unable to do so. And I'll tell you what the backstory is on that in a few minutes. So let me go ahead and start out with a few things to set the stage for this presentation, tell you about what the context is for the story. Okay, these are two books. You can't see the one on the left very well, but the one on the left is Bombs Away. It's the original 1942 edition. The one on the right is another book he wrote called The Moon is Down. And The Moon is Down was a piece of propaganda that he wrote. It was a play novella, but he had it published in 1942, about March of 1942, and it's about, it never mentions what the country is, but it's a Norwegian village that people kind of figure out that he's describing in there. And it's invaded by a non-identified enemy that looks a lot like Nazi Germans that are there. And you might see on the book cover here, that's actually, it's probably not very clear from where you're sitting, but that's actually a scene from the movie that was made based on the book. The book got kind of uneven reviews. Some were positive, some were kind of lukewarm. It's not Steinbeck's best work, but it's one of his most important ones, because over in Europe during the war, they circulated among the underground, and all over Denmark and the Scandinavian countries and Belgium, there were thousands of copies that underground presses had printed of it. And it got such a huge reception that after the war, King Haakon of Norway gave Steinbeck a medal for that book. So I won't be talking about that one tonight, but if you want to look it up sometime and want to read about it, it might be worth your while because the story behind it's very interesting. All right, so with Bombs Away then, what happened with that is sort of another interesting story. Here's what the actual cover looks like on the first edition. Notice the machine gun sight there with the crosshairs and a couple of bombers off in the distance. But down below, you'll see that Steinbeck actually did this with the help of a photographer named John Swope, who worked for Life magazine. Swope was very famous as a photographer, and he and Steinbeck went all over the place collecting information to do the book. And I'll tell you about how that came about. So here's the real backstory. I'll kind of summarize a few of these bullets, and then I want to point out a few things. Early, actually before the war, a couple of years before it started, 1938, Steinbeck offered his services to the government. And he sent a letter to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Actually, it was him and 35 writers. And they were asking Roosevelt, after Kristallnacht had occurred in Germany, asked Roosevelt to try to do an economic, what have amounted to as an economic embargo of Germany, and to try to put up some sort of formal opposition. And FDR was a little receptive to the idea, but remember that at that point, America was sort of standoffish on the war thing, and they didn't want to really get involved at that point. So that happened, and then later in 1940, Steinbeck had 2 meetings with Roosevelt, and he had been kind of watching events in Germany very closely, and he felt that the propaganda effort that the Germans were undertaking was far superior to anything we had in the States to counteract it. So he recommended to Roosevelt, sent him a letter, and Roosevelt invited him to come talk, and came up with the idea that, hey, we should maybe put together some sort of agency of some sort to gather people together to work on formalized propaganda to counteract the Nazi threat, to do something to try to neutralize it from an information perspective. So those wheels were already turning. It wasn't like Steinbeck invented the idea, but he saw the need for it. Then later on, he met with Roosevelt that same year, and he came up with this idea. Some of these schemes are going to amuse you a little bit. The idea that he pitched to Roosevelt the second time he met with him was to flood the European markets with counterfeit German money undermine the German economy. And Roosevelt listened carefully and thought, you know, this is an interesting idea, but the US Department of the Treasury went, are you kidding? they were not too interested in the idea. Then he had a third time, he met with another guy that's why his nickname was Wild Bill Donovan. He was a colonel. He'd won the Congressional Medal of Honor in World War I. And Steinbeck, after he volunteered his services to him, he got affixed to the Office of War Information as kind of a consultant to work with them. And then later as a consultant for the Department of War. But he contacted Wild Bill Donovan and he said, you know, I got an idea. Why don't we drop small parachutes with miniature hand grenades so that children in countries like the Scandinavian countries, like Norway and other countries, can throw small hand grenades at the German army. Well, my mother always told me not to play with firecrackers, but she didn't say anything about hand grenades. So I don't know where he came up with that one. Probably not one of his better ideas. Okay, so we're getting after, so these are some of the preliminaries. And then later on, here's what happened. You can see up on the bullet. In 42, he offered his services to the Foreign Information Service, part of the Office of War Information, which is the precursor to the CIA. It became the OSS and then the CIA. And he was called on several occasions for meetings in Washington. Some of the people he met with already, you've seen FDR was one of them that he met with, but he also met with other people too, including the commanding general of the Air Force, which would be the modern equivalent of the chief of staff of the Air Force, the Army Air Force in those days, General Hap Arnold. And Hap Arnold asked him if he'd be interested in writing a book about bomber training as a recruitment tool to get young men interested in volunteering for service in the Air Force. At first, Steinbeck was opposed to the idea. He didn't really want to do it. He was a little bit reluctant. But one of his close friends, who, if you remember the Rocky movie, you remember Burgess Meredith? He was Rocky's trainer. Well, Burgess was a famous actor. He had also played one of the characters in the film version of Mice and Men. And he talked with Steinbeck and he said, hey, you know, I think you should do it. So Steinbeck started to warm to the idea, and then FDR summoned him personally to the White House and to talk about this book. But they had a short meeting. It was probably only about 10 minutes or so, but FDR talked about everything except the book until the very last thing he said to him. And he kind of smiled and looked at Steinbeck and said, now, John, I want you to write this book. So that's how it came about. He felt like, okay, I can't really say no to the President of the United States. This is something that's pretty important, so I need to do it. Okay, a couple other things I want to point out here that I didn't really mention yet. During the 30s, because Steinbeck had been involved with chronicling the struggles of migrant workers in California and identifying some of the things that were happening to those migrants as they were being, manipulated and abused by the people who owned those orange groves and other property owners up there. He was also, so he was kind of the people in Monterey, the area where he grew up in the Salinas, Monterey, and that county in there, especially the powers that be were not too impressed with him. So he had some difficulties with the Monterey Draft Board, but also he had been touching base with a couple of different people who were affiliated with the Communist Party. Steinbeck was never a communist, but his wife actually, his first wife, Carol, had joined the Communist Party kind of as a lark, just to do it, to see what was going on. And then she dropped it later on. Well, the FBI didn't look kindly on that sort of thing, so they started investigating him. And they were watching his activities all along. Anyway, that's all was going on at the same time. And there's an FBI file, if you're interested. You can look up Steinbeck's FBI file. It's available on Google. So, if you're really curious. There isn't much earth-shattering in there, but it does exist. All right, so here's the bottom line. With his FBI dossier and intelligence service organization from Steinbeck, he tried several times to join the Army. And at one point, Hap Arnold had promised him a commission. But in between the time when Arnold had promised him a commission in the Army to serve and the time that it actually was going to happen, the Army had changed the regulation where you couldn't take somebody just out of civilian life and just automatically turn him into an officer in the United States Army. So it didn't happen. There was a regulation against it. But the draft board didn't trust him, as I mentioned, alluded to earlier, because of his political leanings and negative depiction of local authorities, ranchers and farmers in his journalism and fiction. So that turned the board against him. The FBI dossier on there. And then the Army finally, after they conducted their own investigation, here's what they concluded. You can see on the quote right at the bottom. In view of substantial doubt as to the subject's loyalty and discretion, it's recommended that the subject not be considered favorably for a commission in the Army of the United States. So that sunk it. Steinbeck was not able to serve in uniform. However, later, after he had published Bombs Away, the New York Herald asked him to be a war correspondent for their paper. And he spent time in London, and he also spent time in North Africa, and actually participated in a night raid on an island called Ventotene in the Mediterranean Sea. And he was accompanied by the leader of the Special Forces Group as a journalist that was affixed to it, although Steinbeck was armed with a machine gun. And that commander was Douglas Fairbanks Jr., the actor, who was a war hero, bona fide war hero. So it's amazing story. Steinbeck never fired a shot, and they captured the island without firing a shot because they were able to do all these. They used loudspeakers and feints and dodges and shot bullets and other things in there. And they got an entire island with, including the whole German force that was on the island. It wasn't a huge force, but it was substantial. And they all gave up because they thought a big American force was just ready to pounce. And they decided, okay, we've had enough. All right, I do want to emphasize this though. Sometimes, given the kinds of writings he had done in Dubious Battle and in Grapes of Wrath, some people think that he was sympathetic to the communists, but he never was. He saw the whole idea of the communist movement as dehumanizing. And I picked this quote to sort of illustrate that. There are many times he talks about that, but here's one that sort of illustrates the point. The communists of our day are about as revolutionary as the daughters of the American Revolution. You can tell the time period. This would not fly today, would it? Having accomplished their coup and established their empire, revolution is their nightmare. They have to hunt down and eliminate everyone with the slightest revolutionary tendency, even those who helped accomplish their own. Where they have absolute power, they have established the most reactionary governments in the world. Governments so fearful of revolt that they must make every man an informant against his fellows and layer their society with secret police. And he stood by that too, very much. He also, during the Vietnam War, actually was a hawk. He supported the war, which got him in a lot of hot water. But the reason he supported the war in Vietnam was because his wife was, his third wife, Elaine, who he lived happily with for many years. He finally got it right that, the third time's a charm. That's what happened with Steinbeck. He had the right woman, and she was close friends with Lady Bird Johnson. So what happened in Vietnam was it was more personal for him. Both his sons, Tom Steinbeck and John Steinbeck IV, served in Vietnam in combat. And his son Tom actually was a door gunner on helicopters in Vietnam. So Steinbeck, you can look at, if you're curious about that, you can find what he had to say. He went over there for 5 months as a war correspondent. And Tom Barden wrote a book about that, and he's got a collection of his pieces that he wrote. He starts out very much in favor of what we were doing there. And by the end of those dispatches, his point of view became a little more ambivalent by the end. So was very much a hawk at the beginning. At the end, he had some doubts. But I digress. Let me get back to World War II. Photographer John Swope, this is the man who accompanied him on the flights around the country, observing Air Force bomber crew training. As I said earlier, Swope was a life photographer, and I believe the man behind the camera right there in that photograph is actually John Steinbeck, because Swope took the photo. So I don't think he could be in two, he was pretty good, but I don't think he could be in two places at one time. So some of these pictures, by the way, I met Swope's son, Mark. I spoke at the Steinbeck Festival long ago. This was in 1999. And I met Mark Swope, who was Steinbeck's, or who was John Swope's son. Very nice guy. Unfortunately, he passed away, but he gave me permission to use some of those photographs that John Swope had taken. So some of them have been integrated here, but some of the other photos come right out of Bombs Away, the book itself. John Swope, he kind of traveled in rarefied company too. He was married to Dorothy McGuire. Anybody remember Dorothy McGuire? A famous actress who got nominated for the Academy Award for Gentleman's Agreement, was it, Pam? Or Gentleman's Agreement, which was about anti-Semitism in 1947. But some of you might remember, especially baby boomers out there, might remember her as the mother in Swiss Family Robinson. Okay, and also in Summer Magic. So she had to kind of run with the Disney movies for a while. Very accomplished actress, though. Swope had a good sense of humor, too. That is not the Marx Brothers, but that's John Swope on the left. And the guy in the middle, who looks like Groucho Marx, is actually Henry Fonda. And the guy on the right is Jimmy Stewart, who was also a war hero, a bomber pilot himself. But there they were together, kind of doing a little fun photograph. Okay, I'll talk about these airbase visits. They had to observe training to get material for the book, and so Swope could take the photographs, Steinbeck could do his writing. Steinbeck didn't have time because they had a short suspense to get it done. He started work on it in May, and the Air Force wanted him to complete it by the 1st of August in 42. He didn't get it done. It got done by the end of August, but it was kind of a Herculean task. And Steinbeck was trying to write the manuscript, but he couldn't polish it like he wanted to. So he did the best he could, and he was dictating into an Ediphone to get the stuff on paper so he could write it up. But it wasn't flowing like it did when he wrote Grapes of Wrath, which, by the way, he wrote in 100 days. Incredible, yeah, an incredible achievement. He got it done, but here's where they went. They started out at Randolph Air Force Base in Texas. Then they went to New Orleans. Then they went over to Albuquerque, then to Phoenix, Las Vegas, San Diego, Los Angeles, Sacramento, Illinois, Florida, and they finally ended up in New York. So at 20,000 miles on the road in airplanes, going around collecting information, observing the training that went on for all the bomber crews, exhausting work. Swope, though, they had some light moments, and what Swope liked to do, he was a little bit of an imp. I don't have any of these photos, but he took pictures of John Steinbeck naked, walking around their hotel room, their quarters, and he also took a couple of pictures of Steinbeck on the toilet. So, what a guy. Okay. All right, so what you have with Bombs Away is a form of propaganda, but I wanted to couch it against some stark facts that are the realities of air war in Europe in World War II. Just an absolutely sobering bundle of facts associated with that. If you look at the top, most of you are familiar with some of this. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Dresden, and dozens of other cities were incinerated or obliterated from those bombing campaigns, and thousands and thousands of civilians killed. They dropped over 2,790,000 tons of bombs, the Army, Air Force, and the Royal Air Force, on targets in Europe. They also lost, and this is a staggering figure for me, the American losses were close to 80,000 men on air crews. And if you look down at this bullet down, the next to last bullet, the 8th Air Force was experiencing casualties in excess of 8%, which meant from a mathematical standpoint, you're not going to live to make your 25th mission was the magic number that you had to get released from combat duty. Now, miraculously, some people made it to 25 missions, including George McGovern, who was a bona fide war hero as well. He flew 35 missions in Italy and Eastern Europe. And he tells an interesting story, McGovern did, about one mission that they were coming back from, and they had crossed the Austrian-Italian frontier. One of their bombs got hung up in the bomb bay and didn't release. And McGovern talked to the crew and he says, you have got to get that bomb out of there, because if we land the airplane, it's going to go off and kill all of us. Well, they wrenched at it, worked at it, the bombardier and other guys did what they could. They finally got it loose and jettisoned that bomb, and it landed a direct hit on a farmhouse just over the Austrian border. And later, it haunted McGovern his whole life. But much later on, he got some relief because he went to a political function in Italy, and lo and behold, who was at the function? But the guy who lived in that farmhouse and his family. And he talked to McGovern afterwards and he said, you know, that was my farmhouse that you bombed, but you know what? We all survived. None of us got hit. And he was very conciliatory to McGovern. Said, hey, you know, I understand what the situation was. But what an amazing story. Okay, so then down below, the Dresden bombing was one of the most fearful ones, where it started fires all over the entire city, created its own weather. 250,000 civilians died in that one. So it's just, you know, shocking statistics. That's the backdrop. That's what happened later. The time when Steinbeck was writing the story, however, it was a little different than what you see in the picture here, which kind of looks like some of the pictures you're seeing in Ukraine right now. That's London, by the way. And that family, and Swope took that picture too, John Swope did. Okay, this is Steinbeck, a little passage from Bombs Away that gives you an idea of the romance that he weaves into the story. Strange, almost mystical thing that happens to flying men. It is as though the experience had cut them off so they can only communicate with their own kind, can only be understood by flying men. They have been through something that has the impact of religion. And while most of them are never able to say it, never want to say it, they all understand it. Once a man has entered the brotherhood, it is a rare thing for him to leave it. A flying man remains a flying man until some force outside himself drags him down from the sky. So the theme that he's trying to weave through the text in Bombs Away is the uniqueness of the mission. And the uniqueness of the mission of the Air Force, not just strictly with the bombing groups, but the Air Force itself. And then also the idea of teamwork, which is crucial here. So he chimes that early in the story and then embellishes it as he works through the text in it. So the romance of flight is one of the things he appeals to with this kind of propaganda. What you see in the background there is another nice photograph from John Swope. You see the silhouette of a B-24 bomber against the sky and the contrast between light and dark, very nicely done there. What's his purpose? Describe the process of aircrew training. Demonstrate how the members of a bomber crew are transformed into an integrated team. Take them off the streets here and there across the United States, bring those people together and transform them into an integrated team. Affirm that American airmen, this is the other part that's a pretty big part of it. Affirm that airmen, weapons, planes, and equipment are the best in the world. And then the last thing, assert that we're gonna win it. American or allies are actually gonna win it. So that's the driving purpose behind the actual propaganda itself. He also organizes it very carefully. There's 60 photographs, 11 chapters, and way back, long ago, there's this guy named Aristotle who talked about writing things, and he says everything has to have a beginning and a middle and an end. And Steinbeck had read some Aristotle, so he probably tried to echo that a little bit here. The beginning establishes the purpose, it chimes the teamwork motif. The middle, it identifies the aircrew positions, describes the people on the team, and the end is highlight the central concept, the collaboration of the bomber team that will produce victory in the end. So when we talk about propaganda, I had to put a few things here in to clarify what I mean by that. Many of you probably were watching some of the political ads during the election this year. And there's a lot of propaganda going on there, isn't there? Yeah. So you might recognize some of these techniques as I talk about them when you think about some of those commercials that came up on the television set over the period of the election. The idea is to manipulate behavior and also manage public opinion to try to control perception in some way. It's all about manipulation. It's also a way of using suggestion, and this language sounds kind of technical. It says you manipulate special circumstances and conditions in such a way that through the consequent arousal of pre-existing related attitudes, in other words, embedded attitudes that we all share, you try to hearken to those and suggest ideas that connect with that, like lowering taxes, for instance. That would be one that came out of some of the ads. And then occurs in the mental field a new integration which would not have occurred under different stimulus circumstances. So this will make it a little clearer, and I'll show you examples of each one. One of them is the principle of perception. And I'll show you what figure ground segregation means in just a sec, but that's part of it. Careful arrangement of materials is another one. And then proximity. And what that means, at least in this case, is you have text and you have photographs. You put certain types of text that describe specific things close to photographs that illustrate those things to drive home some sort of perceptual principle. The last thing is simplification. You take complex ideas and sometimes you oversimplify them to make them accessible to an audience. And then you try to bait the audience with auxiliary attitudes. So teamwork, different illustrations of that, I'll show you in a little bit. And the last thing, and this is really what came through clearly in some of the political ads this year, the principle of repetition. Over and over again. Okay, so let me talk about this. I'm going to go do a little psychology on you. I won't get too heavy with this, but have you guys ever seen that picture? They used to have it in psychology textbooks where they'd have this illustration, and you look at it. If you look at it one way, it looks like an old woman, and if you look at it the other way, it looks like a young woman. That's the principle of perception. Something that comes out of, you don't need to know this, there won't be a test afterwards, but Gestalt psychology. Okay, so what do you see there? What do you see on that blank sheet of paper? A rectangle, right? But what is it really? It's a series of X's, but you group things together into a perceptual principle. And then what happens is, you'll see with some of these photographs that I'm going to show you, it helps to illustrate how you segregate something from the background noise to illustrate an important concept about training bomber crews or patriotism or winning the war. Okay, the first thing that you have to separate from the background noise is to identify here, at least what Steinbeck's doing, what's special about the Air Force. Why is it unique? It's unique because it creates a relationship between men in the Air Force, which is unique in the armed forces. It's an individual in artillery, for instance, if he fails in his duty, he may be responsible for a shell missing a target. The responsibility of an officer of the infantry is much greater than that of a private. But in the Air Force, the error or dereliction of a ground crewman, his failure to carry out his job intelligently, can bring a ship down as surely as a bad pilot can. So all these different functions on the bomber crew are specialized functions, and they have to be integrated very carefully or the whole mission will fail or the aircraft won't perform properly. There's also a uniqueness to the bomber team. This isn't like fighter pilots, where any of you ever read Tom Wolfe's The Right Stuff, the novel? You probably saw the movie. Well, in the novel, Tom Wolfe talks about this business with the uniqueness of fighter pilots, single combat warriors that would go up and perform dogfights and missions where there's a single pilot in an aircraft, highly qualified, Tom Cruise, for instance, Top Gun type stuff that goes out on missions. Bomber crews are different. You've got a team in there. And on these bombers, in the B-17s and B-24s, they had 9 to 10 crew members, and about 4 or 5 of them were gunners because those aircraft were bristling with machine guns, 50 caliber machine guns. But you also have a bombardier, an officer. You have a navigator who's also an officer. You have a pilot and co-pilot, those two are officers. Flight engineer, who is in charge of the technical stuff on the airplane, and then a radio engineer who takes care of the radio. The other thing that sometimes gets overlooked that you might find interesting too is in World War II anyway, 7 maintenance crew members for every man who flew. So figure that's about 70 people for one crew to perform the maintenance. And then there's a lot of other support personnel as well, which would include, half of them were women, by the way, in World War II. Some were African Americans and some were disabled, which you don't really hear much about any of those really, but they were there. Okay, so what's proximity? It posits that when an area contains a number of equal parts, those among them which are in greater proximity will be organized into a higher unit. You're talking in the text about a specific piece of equipment. You show a picture of the equipment. It gels together. It helps illustrate what's going on. So here's an example. You've got an air crew performing acrobatics, and then over in the text on there, it's a little too small, so I won't read any of that to you. It describes some of those procedures in there that are part of it. It helps to illustrate it. What it does is it gives line and definition to key concepts. It outlines crucial ideas, and it illustrates specialized missions, training, and equipment associated with the aircraft. Is that making sense? Okay. Here's the B-24 Liberator. Also, the photographs illustrate that by using contrast, the dark shadowing of the B-24 and then the light background. And these B-24s are notoriously difficult to steer too. So McGovern talked about this, but some of you, I don't know if you're old enough to remember when vehicles didn't have power steering. I can vaguely remember that myself. Well, some of these aircraft were like that. So you had to wrench the B-24 around to get it to turn. And a lot of the guys would develop really strong right arms as a result of that. They called it B-24 arm. There's the B-17, another nice photograph there with the shadow and light. You see the outline of the aircraft. And then this is where the text comes in. So you get the two illustrations of the B-17, B-24, and now Steinbeck comes in to use the rule of proximity to describe what they are. The weapons of the Air Force and their use are changing and developing rapidly. We know now that the backbone of air power is the heavy bomber. Pursuit plane, torpedo plane, observation plane have specialized services very necessary and very vital as part of the Air Force, but the puncher is the heavy bomber. You also have to find the right people. So here you go. It's not just anybody who can serve on an air crew. They're selected, first of all, by taking aptitude tests. So when I went in the Air Force myself, I had to take something that was called the Air Force Officers Qualifying Test, which they use to sort of assess your aptitude about service in the Air Force. Here would be the kind of thing where you try to find out if you're suited for bomber crew duty. Also, aircraft identification. Look at those sophisticated models there in the background hanging from the ceiling. Okay, which aircraft is this one? That's a Messerschmitt. Okay, everybody got that? You understand? Okay. This one over here, that's a Focke-Wulf. Okay. But they would show and then identify, of course, friendly aircraft too. You'd have to know what that is as well. The Norden bomb sight was a new piece of technology in those days. Have you ever heard of the Norden bomb sight, any of you? You may have. It was a very sophisticated piece of technology in its day. It had been developed in the 30s. And these guys would go through the training for that, and they had to learn different things like ballistic coefficients, also things like angle of drop. And then I think there's this other concept, if we have any mathematicians out there, it's called Williams theory or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but there's a whole bunch of things that they had to know. Bomb targeting. So you use the bomb sight, you see the shadow. That's probably a pretty low-lying bomb. They bombed from a lot higher than that, I think, on most of those missions. Aerial gunnery was another skill. You had to have, remember I told you 4 or 5 guys on the crew would be trained in gunnery, and I think the other people too would train in it because they might have to fill in if one of the gunners got killed or wounded. Firing range. Mark, that photo isn't in the book, but Mark Swope gave that to me. I like this one. So you have to practice with the flexible gun mount. This isn't like shooting clay targets really, but you'd be out there with that 50 caliber machine gun trying to hit targets and practicing going at different angles and different targets. This is one of my favorite photos from the whole book. Look at the ammunition draped over his shoulders. So he's walking into the aircraft for the training. Bombardiers loading machine gun in the bomber nose in this particular picture. And then actually the specialized navigator training. That was some of the most complicated training that air crews had to go over. So these navigators actually probably performed higher on a lot of those aptitude tests than some of the, I don't want to tell this to pilots, but they probably did. So they got their training. And then of course we have to have another shot with the group. So here they all are all gathered together, swapping notes, talking about what they have to do on their missions and sharing information, helping each other out. And the training aircraft are in the back. And that's to drive home the point about this figure ground segregation stuff. The pilot, it's writ large here, the pilot against the sky, looking off in the distance with his aircraft beside him. Okay, the other thing is principle of simplification, so that you take something complicated and make it into a more accessible format that you can understand, so that even laymen can understand it. So what's leadership? Leadership is a very complicated concept, but actually in this case, you can suggest it pretty well by showing a gritty looking group commander. Notice how he's pitted out his shirt there. He's got a cigarette in one hand, right? And he's got in front of him a pen and a stack of the dreaded paperwork that goes with it in one of those jobs. Looks like a pretty, he kind of looks a little bit like Lloyd Bridges there, actually. All right, you got a lot of moving parts in these bombers too, so you need an aerial engineer, somebody who's really technically proficient. And here what they're doing is they're changing out bomber engines. And then this is the fun part where they start, where Steinbeck starts plugging into simplified masculine character types. And most of these types derive from frontiersmen and guys like the Kentucky riflemen, like say Daniel Boone, for instance. But here, Bill the Bombardier, he makes these names up. He's from Idaho. He's a son of a railroad engineer and a product of the alert democracy of the West. I guess in the East, if there's democracy in the East, it's not very alert. It's kind of it's asleep, I guess. Then Al the Gunner, a soda jerk from the Midwest and a successor to the Kentucky Rifleman, one of the modern executioners of the air. Don't you love that? Love the language there. Al the Gunner, he's a soda jerk from the Midwest and a successor to him. And Abner, the flight engineer, small town California, emblematic of the restless, intelligent man. Joe, the pilot's also from California, the emblem of alertness, strength, physical dexterity, and leadership. And then finally, Alan, the navigator, is from Indiana. He represents controlled thinking and exactness. So they become allegoric figures in here, essentially, symbolic of these masculine types. Where does it come from? He gets it out of the traditions of Western literature and the mythic characters from The Taming of the Frontier. The individualist and a joiner, a relic of the past and a harbinger of the future, free spirit, yet disciplined, a Democrat and a Superman, and then also the combination of Daniel Boone and Henry Ford, the great industrialist and the hero of the frontier, all combined into one. It's getting a little heavy, isn't it? Yeah. That's why it's not one of his best books, but it's, and this is interesting too. Now this topic, it hasn't gone away, the Second Amendment. Guess what? Here it is again. People talking about it to this day, probably into it. He's baiting the audience with these auxiliary attitudes. What's the Second Amendment? The right to bear arms. So remember, this is Steinbeck in the 1940s. So, ladies insulted by this. It's just a reflection of what his attitude was. We may be thankful that frightened and civil authorities and specific ladies' clubs have not managed to eradicate from the country the tradition of the possession and use of firearms, that profound and almost instinctive tradition of Americans. Luckily for us, our tradition of bearing arms has not gone from the country, and the tradition is so deep and so dear to us that it is one of the most treasured parts of the Bill of Rights. The right of all Americans to bear arms with the implication that they will know how to use them. So there's one, Bill of Rights. And here it's exemplified in the photograph. Men and their guns, right? Bearing arms, men and guns. That's another one. That wasn't in the book, but Mark Swope gave me that photograph too to use. I love this one. Here's the guy, the soda jerk come machine gun killer. Transform him into a lean, mean fighting machine. Okay. And then, don't forget popular legend. So he ties into the Three Musketeers, all for one and one for all with this. The men live together. They go out together, eat together. They fly individual missions, flight missions, squadron missions. There are more musketeers here than the original three, but the motto of a bomber crew might well be the familiar all for one and one for all. Men who know what they are doing are the best fighting instruments in the world. Men are the true weapons of the Air Force. It is an understanding of this which goes into the careful choice of candidates, the careful training of individuals, and finally, the careful grouping of men in the crew. There they go. Navigator, pilot, and bombardier, the pilots and the Three Musketeers coming out of the hangar. Okay, and then don't forget team sports too. So from the time of their being able to walk, our boys and girls take part in team playing. From one old cat, nobody plays that anymore, do they? I don't know that one. I remember Pum Pum Pull Away. From what to sandlot baseball to football, American boys learn instinctively to react as members of a team. They learn that each team must be a balance of various skills. And this instinct for team play and team reaction, the Air Force finds its material for the greatest team of this emergency, the bomber crew. For the bomber crews are the close-knit teams which will defend our goalposts and drive deep into the territory of the enemy. Picture of baseball. There's the guys in their free time. Who doesn't like baseball, right? I can think of a lot of people, but it's kind of boring, like this presentation. Okay, democratic principle. Here's another one. This is truly a team, and only with its team-like quality could the bomber successfully function. Here is no commander with subordinates, but a group of responsible individuals functioning as a unit, while each member exercises individual judgment and foresight and care. The bomber team is truly a democratic organization. Don't forget, there are other people here too, the opposite sex. The Rosie the Riveter figure gets a little bit of an illusion here. Not a very strong one, but a little bit. So here she's assembling, it looks like a wiring, some sort of a wiring harness or something on the assembly line there. So women were involved too, and they, you know, gave a little passing mention of that as well in the book. All right, and then the language itself, a couple things here. What I did is I tried to underline a couple things. And Steinbeck, as a craftsman, even though he had to rush it, he'd made deliberate use of a couple of rhetorical techniques with the language, one of which is repetition. So this crew, once established, will remain as a unit. The men will know one another as few men ever get acquainted, for they will be under fire together. They will play together after a victory. They will plan together and sleep together on missions. And finally, there is the chance they may die together. That's anaphoria. So that's another one for cocktail parties if you want to throw around a few rhetorical terms. The other one is, get this, conduplicatio. Okay, that's the repetition of words in mid-sentence. So notice how many times capable is used there. It's an intricate and marvelous machine, capable of climbing to great altitude, capable of tremendous range, capable of carrying great bomb loads, which in those days on a B-17 and a B-24, their bomb load capacity was roughly about 5,000 pounds per aircraft. You know what a B-1 can carry? About 70,000 pounds per aircraft. So as a result, they had to fly in box formations to get carpet bombing done effectively. Okay, and then the repetition of it in the last part of it. All right, we're coming down the home stretch, folks. So thanks for your patience for getting in here towards the conclusion. But here's putting it all together then. Pre-flight preparation, the maintenance crews getting everything ready, going through the checklists. Skilled takeoffs and landings, disciplined formation flying. With those formations, I was talking about box formations. What you would have is 12 aircraft per squadron, and then 3 squadrons per group and 3 groups per wing. So that'd be over 100 aircraft, I guess, if a whole wing took off, but they had to go in horizontal and vertical formations and fly tightly in those formations to concentrate the bomb droppings to get the carpet bombing effect on those targets, whether they're trying to blow up a factory with ball bearings or submarine pens or whatever the case might be for their railroads, terminals, that kind of thing. Precision bombing, you might notice they missed the target there. But as you know, you remember the phrase, close only counts in horseshoes, lawn jarts, and strategic bombing. And then there's the crew, look at that. They're all coming back safely. Unfortunately, many of them didn't make it back in the actual mission. And the final effect, from as Steinbeck would have it, mastery of the skies. So that's the end of the portion of it, the photographs and words. I just did a couple things to give you for some takeaways before I open it up for questions. But here's what I think, for my money anyway, it's not Steinbeck's best stuff. But for what it's worth and what it tries to do, I think it was effective. And it's his first face-to-face confrontation with technology and modern warfare and their interface with the American myth. The other things to remember is it fails miserably as literature. One of the critics, after he wrote it, said it had about the same relationship to literature as a recruiting poster has to a painting. Okay. Thought of tech, but functional propaganda. Did I just lose it? Okay, you're there. Sorry. Thoughtful manipulation of technique in service to a worthy cause. Also, if you look at it as propaganda, it exemplifies a reasonable, rational response to an unreasonable, irrational threat. It's also, it shows how the practical application of constructive human group endeavor can destroy evil. And it's a significant, directed, focused, and conscientious action designed to protect democracy against the growth of fascism. So if you look at it in that way, you can see that it's an interesting piece, and it's purposeful, and it's thoughtful, and it served the purpose. Now, later on, after the war was over, Steinbeck published a bunch of his memoirs that he had written when he was a war correspondent for the New York Herald after he got assigned to London and then later to North Africa. And when he was in London, he described a bomber team. And he has a section in there where he talks about what happens to these guys when they come back from the missions. So this sort of romanticized image that he gives of the bombing mission, the team function and all that, it got seasoned later on when he realized that the casualty rate was what it was. And I think he was aware that that could happen. It wasn't like he didn't know that, but it really brought it home to him later on. So he had some awareness of it. If you're curious, I'll do some shameless self-promotion here. The two things I have highlighted, there's a couple of publications. I did a book chapter on this, on The Moon is Down. If you really want to fall asleep, you can read that one. It's actually a good pill for going at nighttime. Just read it and it'll put you to sleep in about 10 minutes. It works every time. The other one is a thing I published for War Literature and the Arts on Bombs Away. And Pam, let's see, I guess I got to get that. Did I leave it over there? You want to bring that up? Yeah, the Bombs Away one. Yeah. There is a current edition of Bombs Away if you want to get it. It's been published. You might not be able to see it very well here, but if you read the introduction, I get mentioned in there a couple of times. So they gave me a couple of kudos for some of the work I'd done on it. So if you have an interest. So I'll open it up now if anybody has any questions. Yeah.
So you had mentioned definitely not one of Steinbeck's best works. Do we have any evidence for how he regarded it?
He knew. He said it was he said it was a hack job. Yeah, he did. But he was self-deprecatory. He would depreciate himself a lot of times like that. He didn't think he deserved the Nobel Prize either, and some of the critics didn't either, by the way. But I think he very much deserved it. But that's something that's kind of a subjective judgment. But yeah, Frank.
Roosevelt hired him to do a hack job.
What?
Roosevelt hired him to do a hack job.
Yeah.
Yeah. Seems like.
Yeah, I don't think he'd put it that way, but I'm sure Roosevelt. What is he? He's a very pragmatic politician. Sees an opportunity here to get somebody with some notoriety to perform a mission that'll give it high visibility and really operate as a very effective recruiting tool.
I'm just curious. Did he ever have any commentary on Joseph Heller's Catch-22?
Steinbeck? Not that I'm aware of. Now, that doesn't mean he didn't have it, but I haven't come across anything. Yeah, much different perspective. Yeah, and what happened in Catch-22 is this was unbelievable. But early in the war, the mission count was 25, and then you'd get released, and you'd get to go back and do training back in the States. But as the attrition rate increased and the number of missions increased, they kept extending the end point. So it went from 25 to 27, then it went 30, and then it ended up at 35. And like I said, McGovern made it through 35 missions. Incredible. I had one of my very best friends, I'll just give you one little anecdote here. One of my very best friends from my hometown, his father was a bombardier on B-17s. And he told us a story a long time ago about when he was on a mission and he was over the bomb site. He looked down on the bomb site to sight in the bomb drop. And just as he did that, a piece of shrapnel came through the fuselage, went right through one side and over the other, right where his head would have been. 6-inch hole on one side, yeah. Yeah, other questions? Yeah, Dorothy.
How did he I mean, had to get it into the hands of the men they returned to.
Yeah, well, it got published by Viking, so I'm not sure about how they specifically distributed it, but if they put it out there so you had to buy it, or if they, I don't think they gave free copies, but maybe they did. That's a good question. I haven't really. Yes, not a bestseller. The Moon is Down was a bestseller. Yeah, that one sold. In fact, that sold, the early distribution of Moon is Down outsold Grapes of Wrath, and it's not anywhere near as good a book as Grapes of Wrath. Yeah. To Bombs Away? Oh, they were appreciative. You know, Hap Arnold was very appreciative of it. But there were some people that were working that investigation on Steinbeck, you know, covert investigation into his background, I think, that probably had reservations about not the book itself, but his other involvement in things. So they weren't really in favor of giving him a commission. Other questions? Have I tortured you enough? Well, I really appreciate that you came out here. Thank you very much. Thanks. Hey, right on time.
Are you still teaching?
I retired in 2020. Yeah. So this is an after.
You notice the emeritus on the
Yeah.
slide.
Yeah, I retired in 2020. Yeah. So I did 22 years in the Air Force and then 21 years at the School of Mines. So now I'm out to pasture and have to subject myself to audiences like you guys do. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks again.
I just wanted to say thank you again for coming. Like I said, we do this every third Tuesday. So next month, the presentation is on December 20th. So shortly before Christmas. Maybe we'll have better weather. Maybe we won't. We'll see, I guess. So the presentation is about the National Park Service's Paleontological Collections Fund, housed at the Museum of Geology. So our presenters are going to be Kaylee Johnson, Nate Fox, and Dr. Rachel Benton, who work at the Museum of Geology, and Dr. Benton also teaches some classes for geology and geological engineering. So they're going to talk about preservation of fossils. December 20th, hope to see you. Thank you for coming.